Now, as I'm painting the influence, to really get a good idea of what's happening, I need to go to the joint and I need to rotate it to kind of see how things are rotating. That right there is another example of removing weights. Some of those weights made their way over to the leg. So that's more evidence for you that when you're using the interactive skin weights, that that negative value isn't necessarily, you need to be really careful with it. Painting with a value of 0 rather. Okay, but again, I want to just see how my geometry is deforming, but I don't want to have to switch in and out of the paint skin weights tool. So what you want to do is, I'm going to go back to my outliner here. I'm going to grab the hips. I'm going to select the hierarchy, and I'm going to come over here to frame 1, and I'm going to set a key. Now, where you'll do that in is an animation. You can set key. That's what the S key. And I set a key on the translation, rotation, and scale. The only place I really need a keyframe on is just the rotation. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to click and drag with the left mouse button or the stylus. Right click, and I'm going to say break connections. Right here. And so that deletes the keyframes. And I really only want just a rotate key. So I'm just going to grab the rotates, right click, and say key selected. Another way when you're setting keys is just, if it's just on rotate, I could say Shift E, translate Shift W, and scale Shift R. Another thing that I use is this down here. This is auto keyframe off and on. I keep it on so that anything that you adjust after it has a keyframe on it, if you just make an adjustment, you'll see that it puts a key there. So the red ticks are for keyframes. What I want to do is just set up some calisthenics or just some movements for the character. I'm going to keep it down to a value of around 30. This is my frame range, and that's represented by these inner values. And then the outer values here are the extent of the animation. So I'm going to put the extent of the animation from 0 to 30. So what I'll do here is E key, rotate the arm down like that. Then I'll put it back up again. Now it's good to know that if you can try this looking in the mirror, but if you rotate your arm up, you're not going to be able to go past that point without breaking your shoulder. Once your shoulder gets up at that point, and if you want to keep rotating up, what actually happens is then the collarbone gets into play there. Okay, so here I'm going to just reset the collarbone back to 0. Okay, there we go. That's good. Now bring everything back down. And let's take the arm like this. And let's just put a little tweak on the shoulder, on the elbow to keep that, kind of lock that. And then here what we'll do is bend the elbow back and forth. Then here I'm going to take the shoulder and I'm going to twist a little bit. Come back here and put it back in place. And here, frame 30, I'm going to twist it the other way, 20 degrees. Okay, so that's going to give me quite a bit of movement on the shoulder to kind of get that in place. So that's where I'll start first. I actually usually start on the hips first, but I'll just do that. So now I can just scrub back and forth as I'm waiting to kind of see how things work. And I really didn't need to space these keys out as much as I did. I could have just compressed this into a few more frames, just so I don't have to drag my mouse all the way across that far. A way around that would just be to, maybe set total frames to 60. Or even higher, let's say 90. And so now I don't have to scrub quite as far. Okay, so now we're going to select the geometry, and let's go to our paint skin weights. Select the geometry. We also need to be in click on 5, which is the shaded mode. And let's see how everything looks. Okay, so clearly up here I've got more than I need in the shoulder. So I can either select the shoulder like this, or I can right click and say select influence. That'll select the shoulder. If I tap F, okay. So I thought that would frame everything, or just the shoulder, but it's framing everything here. Okay, so again, I want to use the just adding to instead of taking away from. So let's go to the shoulder, select influence here, and I'm going to just start painting weights on. Look around the other side. I want these to kind of wrap around the shoulder as they come down. And then let's move back to the collar. And so here we need to add to the collar. Let's kind of move the shoulder up a little bit. Let's add some to the collar. And I think what I'm going to need to do is, when I come up like that, the collar is not going to affect these quite as much when I'm coming up. So I also need to select influence here on the spine 3, which is sort of like this entire, represented by this entire cluster, but it originates here. And I need to add some weight to that. So you can see it's sort of a back and forth between joints there. And you really just need to keep playing the animation to see how it looks. Now, right here we can see that I've got, I need to add some information, this area into the collar, make the brush a little bit smaller, more fine-tuned. But that was too much. So let's hold down the shift and just kind of smooth it out a little bit. That was too much. Go back to the shoulder. So it's just this sort of back and forth. And then towards the end, a little bit of smoothing until you kind of get what you're after. This is a pretty difficult character to do this operation on because he's a wrestler and his shoulders are so massive. And when he brings his arm down, there's simply just going to be a lot of compression there that we're going to have to kind of take into account. So for instance, up here, I think we just need a little bit more, maybe on the collar, right around here. Maybe just a little bit there. And just kind of smooth this area. This guy is really thick, so this is, it's sort of creating a bit of a little bit of a problem. So here I even need just, a little bit of the arm over here around the lats and underarm. And you can kind of go back and smooth a little bit. Okay. Now this model is not all fully quads, and there's some triangles. It was an older model. It was for a PlayStation 2 game, and I'm choosing to use this model because I think it is a little more challenging. Definitely want to give you guys a challenge. So now let's look at the elbow. So as the elbow comes up there, we're losing some volume. So what we want to do is add more weight here. Now the thing of it is, when this arm does come up, there's simply just going to be some penetration between the upper and lower arms as it bends. And so really the only way around that, well, there's multiple ways around it. One could be just to maybe add a couple additional joints, which we are going to do later. I'm going to show you how to do that. And the other is just to try to manage that compression. We can also use quaternions to help us out there. Again, something we'll play with just a little bit later. Okay, so as the elbow rotates, it's behaving how I would expect it. These vertices are sort of sliding around the joint. That's what I'd like. If you want them just a little bit more over there, so just turn that down. And then again, the smooth, that really helps out a lot. Eventually you get to a point where you just need to smooth it. Hold down the shift. Now let's look at the wrist. I didn't really animate the wrist, but do that at any point. This would be just a good point as any, is right here. So let's just tiny little bit there of rotation, which kind of anchors it in place until that point. And then here I can rotate it like that, and then back like that. Now with the wrist, what we generally do is put in a, come back to our tool. With the wrist, what we generally do is we add a twist joint. And the twist joint is used for when we twist our wrist, which mimics the, in your lower arm, your radius rotating as you twist it. Smooth that a little bit. And we'll have that a little bit later. This is one of the more difficult things that students new to rigging deal with. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of handle this, just the basic weighting first. And there, just smooth. opacity back down. Yeah, so these are really fighting between the collar and the spine, these joints here. So. Okay, so that's weighting a shoulder. We'll move on to, still use a little bit more smoothing there. We'll move on to the rest of the body parts, and what I'll do is speed those up. So again, what I'm going to be doing is just selecting joints, going back and forth between the two, and just additive only. I'm not taking away. I'm always keeping my value at 1. So I'm just going to add weight 2 joints as I need, and then last thing you do is kind of smooth. And so in the next clip, I'm just going to speed that up a little bit, and you can kind of watch the process.